We all know that commercial awareness is about looking at the world through other people's eyes, understanding the context in which they're working, looking at what their objectives are, looking at what their red lines are and their constraints. The key thing is, if you're going to be a good advisor, you need to be able to understand the world through the people that you're advising. In today's case study, we're going to look at the PESTLE technique for commercial awareness. The idea here is to have a system for understanding a complex issue and dividing it up into manageable portions. But the fundamentals are the same. Understand an issue and in turn be able to then analyse it and see it through other people's eyes. So we're going to talk about the bailout of Flybe today. Now, if you're thinking about the people that might be involved in this, who might have an interest in this, you could think about the shareholders of Flybe, the government, the people that work for Flybe, or the people that might have been affected by the airline going under. So first of all, what's PESTLE? PESTLE stands for political, economical, social, technological, legal and environmental. It's 6 categories that lets you think about an issue and break it down. We're going to talk about the Flybe bailout, which happened in mid-January in 2020. Flybe, a mainly UK-based domestic airline, was in serious financial trouble. It looked like it was going to go bust. Appeals were made to the government to say, we need to save this organisation. And a few days later, it was announced that the Flybe was saved. What actually happened remains to be seen. No one quite knows what the deal that was struck by the government was. It might well have involved loans. It may have involved the waiving or the postponement of the air passenger duty, APD. This is a tax that passengers pay per flight. So if you get a budget airline where they're offering a 99p flight, you still are actually paying quite a lot of money. The APD is something that all airlines are subject to, so it was unsurprising when it was suggested that this might have been waived for Flybe that other airlines were furious. Michael O'Leary of Ryanair immediately suggested that he might take legal action against the government if he didn't get the similar sort of subsidy, and Willie Walsh of the International Airline Group, that's the BA group, said this was a scandalous waste of taxpayers' money. So let's try and break this down. Let's look at some of the issues based on our PESTLE arrangement. Political. The government's just been elected with a big majority. It's got a lot of freedom to do what it wants to do. It's trying to make its mark. We're trying to see what the character of this government is likely to be. Clearly, Brexit is one of the big headlines. And one of the things that Brexit supposedly saves Britain from is the strictures around EU state aid rules. What that basically means is you're not allowed to distort a market by giving a specific company unfair advantage. It might well be that the government has decided that this is just a good time to say, look, this is what we're going to be doing. We're free. We're going to be acting as our own bosses here on in. So that could well be a consideration. The other view is, if you're a government just coming in, a big company going under just doesn't look very good. It doesn't look like the economy is going very well. It doesn't look like you're in control. So it may well be that the government had an interest in saying, well, let's keep this company supported. It also might be something to do with the government's newly elected MPs from all sorts of constituencies that, frankly, the Conservatives are not used to representing. There are many more regional constituencies, the Red Wall that we have heard of so much, who are connected potentially by this airline. Certainly there's a feel that the regions need to be evened up. That's a government phrase. So this might again be something that's tending towards that as far as the political decisions go. Economic. Was or is Flybe a viable business? Since it's been floated at 2010, it's been in and out of restructurings, it's had investors buying and selling it. Most recently, Virgin have taken a big stake, but there've always been a certain amount of trouble. So we've got to ask ourselves, is it viable to have a domestic UK airline? Is the country big enough? Is there enough demand for it? Is it necessary economically? One way to consider this is to say, what would have happened if Flybe had gone under? Obviously, they've got lots of routes. Some of those routes, one would imagine, would be picked up by the likes of Ryanair because they are going to be economically viable. Others would have been let to wither on the bow because they're not making any money. That's basic economics. Incidentally, there's a couple of caveats to this. There's the route to Newquay that runs from London to Newquay, which is seen as being a economically essential route to keep a deprived region connected. So that would have been picked up by the government come what may. And a little aside, you may remember that Thomas Cook went bust quite recently. During that breakdown, the German government were allowed, under state aid rules, to save Condor Airlines, who were a subsidiary of Thomas Cook, but who in themselves were profitable. So it was decided that that was good business and that was something that was allowed. Social, this is going to be closely linked to the political and economic arguments, but just let's think about that. One of the groups that's going to be disadvantaged, of course, are the people who have jobs in and around the Flybe airline. Those people being out of jobs would clearly be a big blow for them. Certainly the regions that are being connected by these flights may may well suffer as well. We also might want to think about what's the social attitudes in the UK towards flying. On one hand, the UK is actually addicted to flying. We fly more than most other nations. On the other hand, you might think that there's an environmental concern that's increasingly prevalent amongst the population that says flying is actually probably a pretty bad thing, and therefore airlines being given any kind of subsidy is perhaps societally difficult. Another thought, of course, is that airline passengers are seen as an elite, so the people that don't benefit from air travel perhaps again are seeing the elite people being supported unnecessarily and unfairly perhaps. This certainly is going to be a talking point amongst people throughout the nation. Technology. Well, of course, airline's expensive, but it's a continually developing technology. If you can make the fuel cheaper by the planes being lighter, that's something that's going to aid the airline industry. But you've also got to think about what are the alternatives, particularly in a small place like the UK. We've got roads, we've got rail. Are those technologies and modes that should be competing better with airlines? Why are airlines, we ask ourselves, actually affordable compared to train prices when they're quite clearly very expensive things to do? When you think about going from London to Scotland by train versus plane, it just seems crazy that planes are less expensive. But there you go, the technology has got to do with that. The other thing, of course, is what's the implications for the airline industry more generally with other technologies to do with connectivity. Let's think perhaps of doing meetings on a Skype platform, or generally working more remotely so that people aren't actually travelling so much on whatever mode of transport. So legal, we touched on this earlier on. First of all, we're not out of the EU yet. I'm making this film about a week before the 31st of January. So at the moment, those state aid rules still apply. Are the EU going to come after the British government for providing an unnecessary subsidy? We don't know. Also, think about what are the rights and wrongs of O'Leary's aim to sue the British government. I don't particularly know the relevant competition law, but certainly a market distortion where one company is favoured over the other looks like it could be problematic. And of course, there's the legality more generally about the airline industry and the environment. Are we going to start seeing lawsuits that suggest that the airline industry should start paying for the pollution that we're seeing in the air, and ultimately who's going to pay the greenhouse gas fee? So again, legal issues could be complicated. You can certainly think through them and think what might come out of this. Finally, environmental. So we've again touched on this already. The airline industry is generally considered to be a polluter. It's something that's going to cause the people in the airline industry long-term concern. It could be the end of their industry if you take some of the environmental issues to their extremes. You've got to be looking at them both in the short term and the long term. We've got things like the Heathrow runway expansion. We've got things like the longer term environmental impact across the whole world. It's certainly something that anyone involved with the airline industry should be concerned with. So in conclusion, we've looked at quite a lot of different parts of this issue. Depending on who you're advising, depending on whose eyes you're looking for, some will be more or less important than others. But again, what you need to do is say, what's the priorities? What are the things I need to think about now? What are the things I need to have on sort of orange alert in the medium term? What are the things that I might be going to chuck into the distance and say, well, I'll worry about those later? But the key thing is, look at the whole thing as a matrix of issues, of concerns, and if you'll be able to do that, then you might be able to offer your clients good advice.